Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Oh, and today we've got a good one for you. Jeff Juliano. He is hot as a pistol as a mixer goes. He has sold over 40 million records. Not personally, but the bands he's mixed. He worked with bands like Dan and Shay, Florida Georgia Line, Chase Rice, Michael Ray, Kelsey Ballerini, Ray Lynn, Jimmy Allen, Chris Jansen. I'm going to skip down the list here. Hunter Hayes, John Mayer, Jason Mraz, Train, Paramore, 21 Pilots, Lifehouse, Miley Cyrus, Shinedown. I'm going to skip further down the list here. Shawn Mendes, James Blunt, Dave Matthews Band, Robert Rudolph and the Family Band, Elvis. I don't know how that's possible. We're going to figure that out. Parachute, Bruce Hornsby, James Brown, Ben Folds 5, The Roots, and Sean Calvin. I'm exhausted. And he does all this. I forgot about half of it.
What's that?
He does all this from a bunker in Delaware near Rehoboth Beach. So I guess he's officially busted the myth that you got to move to a major market to mix big records. But he's going to tell us all about that. Before we get started, we want to remind you to subscribe and hit notifications. Tell your friends about it, whether you listen on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever, or iTunes. So thank you so much, and welcome to the program, Jeff
Thanks
Juliano.
for having me, guys. This is awesome.
Yeah, man.
I'm a fan.
Oh,
I just got done watching the Billy Decker one like 2 days ago.
Yeah, he's great.
I laughed pretty much the entire time.
Billy's incrable, man.
I love him. I get off the phone with him and we become friends, and I laugh. I see his number show up my phone, and I just start laughing because I know it's gonna be something good. Yeah. Genuine dude, though.
He's a funny guy, and I felt a little bit weird about putting the McDonald's of mixing in his title, but I made sure I put it in quotes because that's for his own words. That's where he is using.
He said it to me one day, and I just had to sit the phone down. I was dying. I'm like, you really? That's he's gonna be on my tombstone, buddy. And I'm like, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, he's amazing.
All right, dude. Great. So tell us about this. This is your mixing studio here. We see all the platinum records along the walls.
Yeah.
Tell us how that works. I mean, my assumption, being a dude that's really just hanging with you for the first time, I've heard so much about you, but my impression is that you spent many years in recording studios.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Grew up on tape machines and consoles and traveling and
eventually you got to be the dude that does it out of his private facility, right? So this isn't like they were scouring the shore of Rehoboth Beach to find a mix engineer and thought you might be pretty good at it. Tell us about how you ended up being able to be so isolated and making big giant hit records.
Well, I've always wanted to mix albums. That's from the get-go. So I basically I don't know, 25 years ago, probably more than that. I was engineering. I was traveling. Mid 90s. I started as a engineer for hire. I was struggling before that. Had my own studios, would record bands in their rehearsal spaces. You name it, whatever I could do to get the gig.
What city is this?
I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in Vienna, Virginia. So the DC area, Maryland, DC, Delaware, like anywhere in like the Baltimore, Virginia music scene. I used to play in bands. I was a guitar player in several bands. Yeah, I worked at Q. Yeah. I actually had a room at Q for a while. I literally cut a record at Q with one of my bands I had years ago, and that kind of spun into this. Yeah, our original engineer, producer for that, Jim Ebert, who's a great friend of mine still. He as soon as I sat down in the studio, I was like, okay, I'm done. This is what I want to do. Yeah. So fast forward, I was traveling. I was starting to do a lot of engineering, things like that. I started working with a guy named John Alasia, who was a producer in the DC area. Great guy, still great friends. And he and I he started hiring me to engineer albums. So we had a bunch of stuff together that hit really well, like, the Mraz, the John Mayer, Room for Squares, all these albums. We started, tracking all these things in all these big studios, and we'd go back to his house in Maryland that was on the water, and we kind of put all of our gear into the living room and made it our studio. So we'd go to New York, and cut drums with Near for like 3 days, and then come back to John's studio and finish the whole album in his living room. Wow. So we started doing that, and things started picking up and rolling, and he and I, we were like a team. He would hire, we were an engineer-producer team. And this is back when the engineer would also mix the albums. So we'd mix the albums together in the SNAT. So it was a good time, but I grew up basically with consoles and tape machines and ADATs and then D88s and all the stuff that's probably unfamiliar to everybody. Half your audience probably doesn't know what half that a D88 is or an ADAT, So I grew up using all that stuff and learning all that stuff, and working in New York for 2 months on an album at Electric Lady, stuff that the things that they don't happen anymore like that. So it was a really good time to really cut your teeth and learn and spend that much time with an artist for that length of time, spending 15 hours a day tracking with a vocalist till 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and, sharing drinks and whatnot. Just it was a good time to learn for me. And so fast forward, I always wanted to mix. So as in probably 2004, had just bought my house in Maryland, had just kind of set up my studio in it, and said, John called me for a record, and he was like, "Hey man, we got this Liz Phair album." I'm like, "Yeah, I can't do it. I got to mix. I got to stop engineering or I'll never just mix." So literally at that day, I was like, it was in 2004. I've never engineered again. I mean, I literally gave my mics to a bunch of my friends in Virginia, and I said, "Look, if I ask for these back ever, talk me out of it." Because I just got I loved tracking and the experience, but I was just burned out. Right. I met my wife. I wanted to start a family.
What people don't realize is that in the early years of making records like this, they don't get made this way anymore. But you would be laying on your couch, or you would be in the studio for 20 hours a day, 30 days straight.
I was in the studio 20 hours a day. And
it was just like you'd have 2 weeks off where you felt like you were never going to work again. And then you'd have 4 months on where you were working so hard that you couldn't even see straight.
But that feeling never goes away, really, because if I have 2 days in my schedule in terms of like during the week, I love taking time with my family. And I early digging in that early on and grinding that hard really kind of taught me that, hey, I don't want to be the guy that checks out when I'm, 20 years earlier than I need to because I did this many records and never saw the light of day of a studio. So anyway, did you see that David Foster doc? No.
You got to watch the David Foster documentary on Netflix.
That was great. Does he say that same thing?
Well, no. He's that dude. I started in the first 15 minutes. I'm like, this guy's the biggest asshole I've ever met. On TV. I haven't met him personally. But then he owned it in such an honest way it was like I was rooting for him by the end of it. But he did the exact thing that you're talking about. He just never did anything outside of the studio. So failed relationship after failed relationship. Yep. They should have called it foster kids because his kids don't even know him. It was like really it was like a cautionary tale of what can happen. Just because there's work at a high level doesn't mean you have to do it, right?
Oh, I've seen it. There's just more to life. I mean, it's great to be. I'm super passionate about my career. I wouldn't have done the things I've done so far if I hadn't had the drive and like continue. I gotta do better. Always got to learn. Always got to do the right networking. I'm not a schmooze guy, and I don't live in town. I don't live in Nashville. I don't live in New York, so I don't ever go meet the people and the A&R people and get gigs. But you have to be passionate, but you also got to have a life. And you guys probably have kids. Like it's just you get it. Like it's like you've got a wife and you've got a family. I want to go spend time with them. I want to make great records, but also there's balance and there's got to be. And I think I found that here, and that's why I like living here instead of living like in Nashville. I think because the pressure is off in a way, but the pressure is also on because I'm like circle back to if the phone doesn't ring for a couple of days, you're like, oh man, where's it going to come from?
So how are you?
Good run.
How are you generating most of your work right now?
My phone rings.
All referral?
Yeah. It's been like that for years. I mean, I had a manager, agent, whatever you want to call them. I had a couple of those guys and they're great. And my last one, Matt, he and I are still friends. He's in Brooklyn and he works for RCA and he's a hustler. He was great. And those guys are amazing at they know who's making a record. They know who A&R is involved. They know who to pitch to. They know how to do it. But I still work with him here and there. Like if he gets me a gig, I'll give him his cut, because that's what he does. He's great at it. But yeah, it's all word of mouth. It's all about, to me, doing a gig with a producer, especially in Nashville. I've learned that the producer is where the gig comes from. The label is always involved, but really, like if you do a great record, like if I do a record with Scott Hendricks, I hope he's going to call me again. Or I do a record with Corey Crowder, like I'm doing one with him now. Like, hopefully I do a good job and he wants to work with me again. So It's all word of mouth.
And what's that look like? You get a phone call and then they send some files up via you send it or?
Yeah. Dropbox, you send it. So Yeah, he'll call me, or an email call me for a gig, and I'll say, okay, send it to my prep guy, because I've got a guy, my good friend Dave Cook, and he's in San Diego, so he's either on a surfboard, mixing somebody else's stuff, recording somebody's, producing somebody, or writing songs or prepping songs for me. So he gets the files, and he organizes them, he color codes them, he knows kind of my process, cleans toms, all the crap that as a mixer you just don't want to get bought. If I got to sit here and clean tom bleed, my creative brain's going out the window.
Right.
So he kind of does that for me, gets it organized, gets it in a world where I understand a uniform, kind of everything's the same, not template or anything like that, but just organized. And then he sends it to me, then I mix it, and then I'll send it back to the artist, the producer, or whoever, whatever the dynamic is.
And what's that look like? You get up in the morning, you're in mixing by 10 a.m., and by 3 p.m. you're kind of getting signed off on something. What's the time frame?
There is really no, for me, I don't put a time frame. I mean, whatever it takes for a song. Sometimes I can mix a song in 2 hours. Sometimes it takes me a day and a half. So if it takes me a day and a half because the song's got huge strings in it, or has some, maybe I got to call the people and go, hey man, you're missing audio, or hey, and actually my wife tells me I care too much, because sometimes I make things last longer than they do, because I'll say, hey, this really needs a shaker in the second verse. Let me call this guy. Hey man, can you put a shaker in the second verse? I think it's going to be great for the song. Or maybe add the programming to the second chorus. It's only, can I fly this around? They're like, oh yeah, whatever, So, usually a song a day, but if it takes a little longer sometime, or I never do more than a song a day, though, because I can't, my brain shuts off after a while.
Right. Yeah. Billy Decker was talking about how he's usually getting bored around 50 minutes into a song.
Dude, God bless him for that. I wish for some gigs that I could do that, but I can't turn that off in my head. I mean, he's perfected that, and his work sounds great and it stands up. No complaints there. But I get too dug in and I get too involved with the minutia and the tiny stupid little details that my dog won't hear at the end of the day. But once it makes me like jump up and down, I'm like, good to go and sign off on this. But
so if somebody sends you a session that's 100 tracks and has a bunch of stuff from a big string room, a full symphony, is it like, oh, it's the same rate as you're going to mix my shaker, banjo, acoustic guitar release that's going to be the next hit for Keith Urban?
Yeah. So I mean, you can't change. Well, I have an indie rate and a label rate like everybody does, Yeah. But no, I don't. You can't charge extra because it's more tracks. God, my house would be paid off if that's the case. Especially in the past like 5 years, because everybody has, it's so common now to see every production is a full band plus full programming.
Right.
Plus full strings, 40 background vocals doing ahs and oohs, and they're all separate, and
Are you totally in the box?
Yes, I have been for probably 3 years. And the reason for that is a couple of reasons. I was hybrid, and I was running a summing mixer and a ton of analog gear and all this stuff, and then it was like, okay, and then I go do a recall and the gear was broken. It's like, okay, I live in Delaware. I don't have a tech guy. It's working against me here. I had to overnight to Vintage King and have it fixed. And okay, that's one problem. Then I was like, okay, let me figure. Okay, I want to print the gear now, and I would print the say I have a $5,000 worth of outboard gear and a lead vocal. Then I'd just commit it back in the session. I'm like, okay, cool, done. Or on the drums, you run the overheads and rooms through something, print it back in, and then the recall note would come and be like, hey, turn up the vocal in the second verse. Bring this guitar hook up in the turnarounds, and then we're done. Oh, by the way, here's a Dropbox link below of the new pocketed vocals and the new pocketed drum kit. And I was like, Jesus Christ. Like, I've already spent like 2 hours just finding the right gear, right? And I was like running the drums through an EMI limiter and the vocals through a Neve and doing all this stuff. And then, I'm like, wait, the new drums and the new pocket vocal? I'm like, okay, what phrase of the vocals you repocket? Oh, we just kind of felt out the whole thing and nudged it around. Now I'm like, that's it. So, and then there was a record and I was like, okay, so I was kind of like dabbling with mixing in the box with my international clients. I do a lot of Latin pop music, and I was like dabbling in the box with that. And I was like, okay, once I get this sounding good enough, I'm gonna just gonna call it one day and just do this. And I did that on Dan and Shay's self-titled album. They hired me, the one with the tequila on it, and they hired me for that. And I mixed that whole record in the box, and I'd never mixed fully in the box a record like that. So I was like, okay, if these guys are happy with it, then I'm never going back to the gear, because to me it's nowadays with technology and plugins and the way they sound, and
those records sound incredible, by the way.
Yeah,
thank you. But like that's in the box. Like that was my first go with. I mean, I mixed in the box, 20 years ago when it wasn't cool. I mean, I started on Pro Tools 4, and I was mixing in the boxes. That was a transition between people going to studios and using consoles, or hey, I can do it over here, and I don't have to pay $2,000 a day for Electric Lady. So let me just do it in this living room, and we'll get it done. And I was doing that in the box, and people didn't complain. But then, the whole progression of like analog gear coming back in and summing, I bought in hook, line, and sinker. But to me, the mixing in the box, I feel like I lost 100 pounds in the fact of like, I used to be the guy like, oh, I have a vintage 1176, so I got to put the vocal through that because that's what sounds good. And now my vocal compressor changes daily depending on the song and what it needs. And I feel like my palette of colors has just grown. And the stress of not having to worry about if it works or not is gone.
It's a little techie, but what are some of your go-to plugins that you're using these days?
I use the same stuff everybody else uses. Like I love the Fab Filter stuff, the UAD stuff, Waves, big fan of those guys. It's same stuff you guys use. Same things. The Slate stuff is great. It's all to me, you're splitting hairs. Like if you like put a vocal through like Slate's distressor, and then you put it through a real distressor, the difference you may hear in those may be the conversion there and back. It's not necessarily the gear. So, and it's not worth the headache, man. Yeah. To me, I don't track anything either. So if I still tracked, I'd have a ton of stuff, but I don't need it.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, because you've got an opportunity to hit it in the real world and then put it in forever, and you don't have to worry about someone calling you with a new vocal.
I'll get a new vocal call a year from now, and they'll do a radio. They'll do something new, and I'll like you guys get the same thing. It's like, hey, can you drop this in and call it a day? I want my life to be that easy, and I thought that the whole time, and now now it's there. So now I have 2 rigs. I have my studio here, and I have another full rig upstairs with an iMac Pro, to where I can be finishing dinner with my family, and I get a call for drop a vocal, and I can walk in the next room, double click, drop it in, print it, and going. It's the same exact rig both places.
Now, is this studio attached to your house? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so rather than walk down the stairs and go into this room, you just go into the room.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally get it.
Totally no. Well, here's the deal. The reason I did that is because this is like, I don't know, it's like a casino in here. I don't know what time of day it is. And upstairs, I got a light. I have daylight. I can see the street. I can see the FedEx guy going by, like my kid riding a skateboard by the house. That to me is like, if I build, your place looks beautiful, dude. I gotta go. You gotta get your down studio looks unreal, dude. I gotta get down there and check it out. Or next time I'm down, I'm inviting myself. I'll come with Near.
You're welcome to it.
But daylight is huge. It's another thing, man. If I ever did this again, I would. Yeah.
Right.
That's another thing about mixing the box. Like I can do it anywhere. Like I can take this rig that I'm talking about right now and go in our camper and mix an album.
And I thought I read a Waves article where you were talking about mixing one of the Dan and Shay things on a laptop, or
I did.
Is there a story?
That whole record on a laptop.
Is there like a story where you're literally in a camper mixing a record that's one of the biggest records of the year?
I didn't mix it on a camper, but I mixed it upstairs on my laptop. Like 95% of it, my Grado headphones and my Grace D to A and a laptop.
Wow. So no actual speakers?
No. Well, that's like I usually nowadays, like the process is I sit up there for spend like 3 hours on my other rig and Grados and come down here and finish off my studio. And then I'm never touching vocal. I've kind of gotten so used to that. I'm never touching low end stuff, vocal level. It's just kind of like, okay, it gives it the speaker test, and I finish it off down here. Do my automation things.
And do you have like a network where you can just throw files back and forth? You run around with a zip drive?
No, Dropbox for Business, man. Like I literally have both machines syncing. Like right now, the song I was working on before I got on with you guys, it's already upstairs and vice versa. So the only thing I can do is take my iLock and plug it in and double click.
Right. Wow. That's
it's actually really great. And the fact that in my new rig, I can take it with me. This laptop is one of the new ones, whatever.
But
it's powerful.
It's interesting because when you're working upstairs with the headphones on a laptop,
yeah,
you've literally taken away everyone's excuse that's ever said they need to be working at Electric Lady, right?
Absolutely.
It's like as a kid and as a fledgling engineer mixer, you're always like, when I get the SSL, then I'm finally. That's the only thing that separates me from those guys. Is
I wanted an SSL. I wanted to buy one, but they were just, this is too expensive, and I don't have a tech guy. That was 10 years ago though. But yeah, but the thing is that you get dudes who are like diehard analog guys, and I love them. I have friends that are like, no way, man, I'm going down swinging with my, I'm going to be buried with this compressor. Good, that's great. Your records sound awesome. I'm happy for you. That's just not for me anymore, because I've seen that. But to me, the grass is greener. If you can get the same results with it and make your life easier, why wouldn't you do that?
And what do you use? Like you have like a little footprint that is. Can you point your camera towards your mixing position, or is that like?
I can't right now because it's kind of like I've got this dongle with all these. Yeah, I can send you pictures though later.
Yeah, send us some pictures. We'll put them up. We'll put them up on the screen.
Yeah, and plus I just got this new rig, so I'm integrating it. So I'm in the middle of shrinking my big desk. That literally my wife came down. I've got this giant Sterling modular. She walks in my studio the other day. She goes, "You need a new desk." And I'm like, "Why? I love my desk." She goes, "It's empty. There's no gear in it anymore. It used to be cool. Now you have nothing. You have a computer sitting on a like." Yeah, you're right. So I'm literally in the process of, I just call it Sterling modular. I'm like, dude, I need to shrink it to the smallest plan and get an arm for and he goes, what about your gear? I'm like, I don't have it.
You got to go to Office Max and get those rolling little wood desks and really embrace the laptop lifestyle.
No. But it's got to still feel cool,
How much do you miss the big giant console that you take the picture in front of? From a completely nostalgic standpoint.
Nostalgic. I love that. I mean, I could probably mix a song on a console in probably Billy Decker speed. I could probably do a song in 45 minutes, no doubt, because it's the tactile, the hands-on, the immediacy of grabbing. Oh, snare needs more top end. I'm not clicking. That perspective is awesome. But do I want to fix it? Do I want to pay the electric bill for it?
Right.
Do I want to recall it? No way.
Yeah.
Not with today's standards, because today's standards, everything's so fast. Like I did a song yesterday. It'll be on the radio next week. And there's probably 3 recalls between now and then of, oh, hey, can we copy and paste this? Can we mute this? And if I had a console, and I'm always constantly, like I have 4 different projects I'm doing right now. So I got to jump between them.
Right.
So there's no way I can do a console. I mean, but to answer your question, I do miss the immediacy of it. And there is a sound. There's no doubt when you're using a console, there's a sound to it. I actually bought the Waves NLS because of your video.
Well, that's a really great
plugin.
That's a great plugin.
But your video was really good on it. It really made me think, oh, well, let me start dabbling in this instead of my analog summer and see if I can get the same results.
Well, that one console in particular, the TGI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it
sounds
called.
great.
6, 7,
default
8, 9,
setting
10.
Sounds great.
But if that console will generate this mid-range that you don't get, you can create mid-range that didn't exist. It's like, mid-range is, some people call it warmth, some people call it mud, depending on what gear it went through, right? And it's the same exact frequency. But this will actually generate that really warm, hazy kind of Neve-esque EMI console mid-range when you didn't have it before.
Immediately, though. That's you put it on the stereo bus before you even do anything else.
Yeah.
It changed your judgment on everything. Like you will treat drums differently because that's your color, and that's the same way we work on consoles. It's like you pull up a kick drum on a Neve or an SSL, it's immediately going to have a thing before you touch. It's going to affect your decision making all that on the board.
Well, a buddy of mine was just down in Nashville making a record at my place, and he has an SSL, and he just had Andy Wallace up there mixing in his room just outside of New York City. Yeah. And he said he couldn't believe how hard Andy Wallace was hitting the center section. Yeah. And if you didn't come from that era, you learn that about after you go to a couple other sessions with friends, you're like, why is everybody hitting the center section so hard? It's because it sounds awesome.
It had a sound, and that way you end up doing less to all the individual tracks because you're getting all this glue. It's funny. I used to work in a place, I think it's called Sound on Sound, in New York City.
Oh,
and
yeah, Dave Amlin's place.
Yeah, and Andy that was where Andy's, was it Sound on Sound where Andy had his room? Andy had his mix room in this place. I think it was, wherever Andy's mix room was, it was not Sound on Sound. That's the magazine.
It was Jesus. Midtown.
Yeah, wherever Andy had his studio
Platinum
for years.
Island, was it?
No. God, I forgot. But anyway.
Was it Skyline? No.
They had two places, one on each side of Manhattan, and this is the Andy Wallace's room where he did like Buckley's record. He did all the Rage Against the Machine, you name it. But I walked in on him one time, like his assistant came over to the room I was working in, and he's like, "Oh, yes, I'm working with Andy." And I'm like, "You talking to Andy Wallace?" And I walk out, and he's like, I walk by the room, and he's mixing something that's just kicking ass, like rock record, but he's listening at like 50 dB. And he's just sitting there, like right up on the speakers, right in the console, and he's just barely moving anything. And I remember then I was like, my God, the guy listens so quietly. Like he wasn't jamming any. He had giant like Tenoys in the wall. It never touched him. It was just like this tiny NS10 volume. And then and later on, another time I was working in his room. I was working with another producer, and we were mixing in his room. And he walked in, he goes, "Do you like my room?" I was like, "Shit, that's Andy Wallace." And he was like a professor, man. He looked like a college professor. Yeah. And I'm like, "Yeah, man, this room's amazing." It's shocking me. Like, I remember this because he had like no gear. He had the console. He had like 2 SPX 90s set on symphonic. That was his thing. And he put it on bass. I thought that was, I totally picked his brain in a non-stalker way. I did my best at least. And I was like, in a 1073 and like a DBX 160, right? It was like minimal shit in this giant SSL. And I was like, it's funny to me how I would think you'd have more gear. And he goes, well, he looks at me and goes, well, if I can't get it done on that console, I shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
I'm like, mic drop, man. I mean,
right.
Andy Wallace just dropped. I mean, that was proof positive. Like, okay, it's all about his brain and his ears and his feel.
Yeah. How many being in New York or in on sessions, how many guys have you got to like that were legendary? Have you got to watch and say, oh, I am totally gonna like absorb everything that I see that this guy does because he's an epic dude in my history?
A lot. Like I worked in so many studios in New York and even in like Sunset Sound in LA, and I forgot the other place I worked out there, but New York was my main place where I worked. Tons of guys. I was working on a surround record one time with John Elijah. He and I were doing it was a I forgot who it was. Anyway, we're doing a surround mix. It was a live mix, and he and I were just dumbfounded. Like, I don't know how to do surround. Do you know how to do surround? And we're sitting at the Hit Factory, right? In this giant console. It was like Ferrari yellow, right? The console was or maybe it's red, but the speakers, they had chrome ceilings. This place was like stupid. I mean, the Hit Factory, I've done a couple things there, and I'd always walk in and walk out laughing, like, I can't believe that I just worked in the blinged out, right? So I'm sitting at the console, and John's like, man, I don't know how to do this surround thing. I'm like, neither do I. He goes, wait, my friend's working upstairs. Let me go get him. He knows all about this shit. And in walks Phil Ramone, right, with his engineer, cigar guy, Frank Fittipelli.
Yeah.
Phil Ramone and Frank Fittipelli walk in and say, I hear you guys have trouble with surround. And I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be taken to school by two legends at surround and legends, on everything. And so Phil sat down next to me and he's like, what's the concern here? I'm like, man, I don't know where to put anything. I've got a joystick panning. He's like, that's the beautiful thing is here. It's no rules. Put the bass on your knee. Put the snare drum on your shoulder. Put the audience up there above that clock. And I was like, that's it? And he goes, yeah, no rules. He goes, the best part about it, no recalls. Because who's going to listen to this shit and say, you know what? I don't want the bass on my knee. And I was like, thank you very much, Mr. Ramone. He's like, call me Phil. I'm like, okay, Phil. And he walked out. I'm like, legend right there. Just set me straight.
That's a great
But that
story.
kind of experience was like priceless. And I've mixed like 5 surround projects since then. And every time I hear them in my head, put the bass on your knee, put the snare drum on your shoulder, whatever. It doesn't matter. No rules. And it's fun,
I think half of being successful at anything is realizing that when you look down at your EQ, and if it's drastic, you don't have to go, ugh, I can't do that, right? And then some dude like a Phil Ramone or Frank Filippetti walks in and they say, oh, sounds great. And all of a sudden, all the rules go out the window. It's like you feel like, oh, I'm EQing too much, or that's too much compression, or a pro wouldn't do it that way, or this is the wrong way technically to do it. And then some legend shows you and says,
Totally.
"Oh yeah, man, go for it.
Whatever, go for it." And that's pretty much with mixing. I think that should be the rule, that there is no rules, because if you think about it, no one can listen to, the rule is that the worse you make the bass sound in solo, when you solo it, the better it sounds in the song.
Yeah.
It's all in context. No one's going to be able to take it apart later and go, I don't like the way he was EQing that vocal. If it sounds good in the song, who cares? Who cares what plugin you use? Who cares what gear you use? As long as you got to the finish line and people dig it, that's all of it. I mean, it's that easy. So the people get caught up in the gear, and I was one of them, got caught up in all the, got to have this and this and this. And then it's just.
Is that part of the journey though?
It is part of the journey. And it's cool to have grown up using all this gear and these microphones, because I think I make better decisions than someone, because I knew how to work the original.
Right.
And I knew how to really milk a vocal or a bass guitar or drum kit with certain gear. And now I can just go to the plugins. And since the modeling now with these plugins is so spot on in software, so I can get those results immediately and still be within a double click of the recall.
Is everything you do in Pro Tools? Is everything set either WAV files or as a set?
Yeah. Like some people I work with, like Corey Crowder, I've been doing a lot of records with him. He works in Logic. So he sends the Logic session to my prep guy, Dave, and Dave will turn his Logic session into a Pro Tools session or export the file.
Nice as a producer, by the way, for somebody else to do it. That's kind of a nice feature. I'm not gonna lie,
dude. I couldn't imagine. I'm sorry. It's having someone set up your sessions in terms of figuring out what audio 16 is. Is that part of the drum kit? Is it an overhead? Is it a hi-hat? Or if it's like part of a string section, what mic is this?
Right.
And
not to mention the revisions. It's like, hey, can you bring up the looted flute that they saw on the screen, but they called it audio 16 in their
Right. And that's when I get in with them and say, okay, what is this? You got to tell me, because some of my clients I do a streaming, I do audio movers with on recalls, and like with Dan and Shay, like Dan and I sit on, like I'm mixing a song for him today, literally, when we're done here, and like later on tonight or tomorrow, he and I will jump on Skype together, and we communicate via Skype, and I'll stream him the session, and I'll screen share my Pro Tools screen with him, because he'd be like, yeah, right there, let's mute that, or let's do this. So if I do that with a client and they see audio 16, I'll bust their balls on it. I'm like, dude, label it. Well, we're in a hurry that night. Dan never does that. He's as crazy as I am in terms of organization.
Well, and you'll get a record that has like, if it's a dance record, it's got like conservatively 15 to 20 to 30 keyboard parts. Oh, kick drums, but keyboard patches that are all pads, right?
Right.
They're all like, they say like, bring up the lilted pad half a dB, and you're like, which audio 1 through 25, which one is it?
Yeah, and not only that, the hard part for me is making room in 2 speakers for 20 pads, and then add the programming, the drums, whatever, all the vocals on top of it. I mean,
all right, so tell me how many times you've done this. I got to the point, for good or for bad, if I got a record and it was a mess, I just turned stuff off.
Yeah, every time I turn something off. You mean just like mute it?
I would just, if it didn't sound good, I turned it off. And then if the client said, hey man, I'm not hearing the this or that, I would say, okay, and I'd bring it back up. But it got to the point where it was just like, if you aren't going to make the decisions, I'm going to make it.
Yeah, I've done that a million times, and probably half of those times they call me out on it. Say, why did you mute this guitar? I'm like, well, it's out of tune, it's out of time, and I don't know. It's just, there's so much. I think that the bar has been raised on as a mixer. Like, people sometimes send files with not even tuned, like rarely, but I'm like, it's got to be tuned and edited before you send it to me. Right. And sometimes they say, well, we don't have time to pocket this stuff. I'm like, my guy Dave is hire him, then he'll prep it, but you hire him to do that. But he's like, that's such a big part of it. Well,
what is the deal with that? I mean, it's like, I know you're in a hurry to get your record done, but get the record done.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to credit me as producer on the record and give me a couple points on the record, it's like, you tune the vocals, you pocket the vocals. If you're sending me new tracks with new pocketed vocals and drums, send me those tracks the first time you send me it.
You sound like my wife, man. This is a conversation we have like literally 3 times a week. She's like, she can hear, my studio's soundproof, but she can hear me scream sometime, like, you've got to be kidding me. But I sound like a hostage, And she's like, oh, yeah, I come upstairs like the end of the day, and she pushes the wine across the counter, and I'm like, yeah, one of those. But but again, I will call people on it. Like if they send me something that's not right, I'll literally, I don't care if it takes time out of I kind of screw myself probably schedule wise at this, but if it's a good project and someone sends me something they got to tweak a couple things in it, I'll immediately call them, say, I'm not touching this, man. Please pocket this, tune this, do this, and send it back to me. Well, I don't care about release schedule. I'm already pushing mine, not being a dick. I care. I actually want your stuff to sound good. And if it means someone overlooked this in the prepping process before you send it to mix, then go fix it. Send it to me when it's done. Get it right. Because I mean, people should care about the quality control, and there's a lot of people that do, but there's still some that sneak through that I'm like scratching my head at. Like,
well, and they send you the direct,
not hear that?
The direct line for the guitar, 3 amps of the guitar, right? And then they expect you to be like, I'm going to go back to the direct line. I'm going to reamp it. I'm going to get you your perfect sound. I'm going to tune your vocal, and then I'll pocket your vocal. And it's, God forbid you do it, because then you're that guy.
Right. I mean, I grew up like melting 4 microphones onto one track on a console, or even when I didn't have a console, I made it happen with Pro Tools auxes. If I wanted to use more than a 57 on guitar, which is sometimes lunacy, just to put a Coles on it because you own a Coles, like doesn't, you know what I mean? Like there's those guys that have to put all the gear on it, and they're the same guys. I probably shouldn't sound like an asshole, but like the people that put the gear in the comment section, like this was, they list all the input up, and I'm wondering if that's, sometimes I think it's for, okay, if I got to retrack, if I got to punch this in, I know the bass was through the LA2A.
You're talking about in the session.
In the session, no. If they have the list of all the gear in the bottom, those guys are usually the ones that the tracks don't sound so great. Like, but I just, there is a thing to where this has been happening for like 15 years now, sessions with every DAW in the world having more and more capabilities tracks, people just load them up instead of committing to like, okay, let's get in there and get a guitar sound. Put it on one track. You're going to double it, great. Put it on another track. Don't have 4 mics in the DI and leave it up to the mixer to see what amp simulator he has to dump on the DI. To me, that's pointless.
Yeah.
That's lack of production, because if you have a vision as an artist or a producer, you should literally be baking that into the recording. Like if a guitar player wants a delay on his guitar, for God's sakes, track it that way, because he's going to react differently in the performance, hearing that back in his cans.
Yeah.
Better than I mean, it's great to have a little vibe or here and there on mixing, but if someone's really going for it, print it.
Miss, like in the old 2-inch 16 track or 24 track, being able to pull the faders up around 0 and being able to say, okay, I get it. Now you can't do that, because half of it is like DIs and or 8 kicks or 10 snares.
8 kicks out of phase with each other.
Yeah.
That's a hard one, man.
You've got to be, it's very difficult to just grab a session now and pull up, be able to say, oh, this is what, I get it. This is the song. Right.
But that was the console way of working too. Now it's like click, 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 click. I mean, again, the convenience of working in the box is great, but when the speed and the immediacy of just pulling a song together on a console, even with the 15 kicks, would be way easier than doing it the way we do it now.
Yeah.
But still, the end result would be like, why the hell did this guy give me 15 kicks to? Why didn't he just figure it out 1 with 2, 3, maybe 3?
Right.
Do you have Dave do gain staging for you?
No. I do sometimes have him clip gain stuff. I'm like, I always tell him like, make
super hot, or like
make it look like it's recorded in 2005 is what I tell him on the WAV file.
What's the 2005 waveform look like, by the way?
12 dB less than it is now.
Okay.
Yeah. You know what it is. You're
turning everything down.
Yeah, because, well, it depends. Some people.
Why do you care? Tell us why you care.
Because mixing the boxes to me is all about gain staging. You lose your headroom, you're done. Once you overbake it or cook it, whatever you want to say, you're done. So the more headroom you have, like plugins are frying out. Like the Billy sees reds all the time on his plugins, says he doesn't hear it, and I don't hear it in his stuff either. And I sat in his studio, and all that shit was red, and I didn't hear it clipping at all. He's like, I ain't worried about that. And I'm like, bullshit. And I sat there and heard it, and I was like,
so keep in mind what you're talking about. It's like, yes, you have in the digital full scale world, you have to 0. That
Yes.
will sound, signal to noise ratio is the only thing you're going to be battling, but that'll sound the same throughout there in the file. But once that file hits a 32-bit or a 64-bit mixer that has plugins in it, those plugins feel weird about different levels, don't they?
I totally, yes. So that's why I bring it down. Like when you have a transient on a vocal that's spiking up, like when people, guitars are big culprits, but usually drums, like they look like they put the entire kick or snare through an L1 and just committed it and sent it to you. And like, why? Because I just think that plugins are more sensitive, because if you oversaturate a piece of outboard gear, like you said with the console thing, it could be cool. It could have a sound, but when you do that to plugins, there's no forgiveness there. It just craps out and you're done. So I think the more headroom you have on the file, because I don't like having I know there's also math in the Pro Tools faders being way down versus up near Unity. There used to be this argument years ago, you probably know about, that like the further down they are, the
less resolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I try to get it to where my vocals sitting at Unity gain in a mix, like nothing else. I'm not like, there's guys that set up their plugin outputs. I think Tom Lord-Alge does that, where he sets all his Pro Tools out here, his plugin, his last output setting is on his plugin, so all his faders sit at 0. So if anything's not 0 at Unity, he knows it's been changed, which is kind of brilliant and kind of crazy at the same time. But I usually like to have it so where I'm not having to keep the faders all way down, because that drives me crazy.
So there's two kinds of, for people who don't know, there's two kinds of audio faders. There's what's called a linear fader, which you don't ever see, and an audio fader. So if you look on a console, it'll be the area, the hash marks around 0 will be really wide, meaning like you can get to a resolution of a dB by just doing this. But if you move that down to the bottom of the fader, you see the difference between -50 and -60 is this. It's the same amount. So they figure, oh, they're not going to be down there, so we don't have to give them res down there. So they gave you the resolution around 0. So ideally, you do want to keep your faders around 0, just so that you can have some semblance of resolution.
Yeah, when I'm writing something, I don't want it to be a giant amount. I want it to be like 10th dB increments if I have to. It's like, because I do that fine mode, want to do that. But yeah, so if I was to mix, a lot of the times, not everybody, but there's probably 50% of the people send stuff to me, it's so hot. And it's more so in Logic. People that do Logic have hotter files. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, Logic works very differently in its gain state.
It's got to be a headroom or something thing in Logic.
They always
more open.
Print it with that leveler on it. There's something that they don't know they're
that's normalization. Yeah.
And it literally has the thing as if
literally when you bounce the files, it's an option. Yeah.
Well, you can't do anything with it.
Well, there's a thing with Logic. That's another thing. I have a video. It's a pure mix video from, I mean, it's like probably Logic. It's some way old version of Logic. But long story short, when people send me Logic files, sometimes they'll export it all, and it's all, the stereo file is really mono, and I don't know if it's mono or stereo. But so there's a checkbox in your export where you can make it, you can do it the right way, and people overlook it all the time. So I literally copy and paste this video in an email to people and saying, if you're doing Logic, please follow these directions in this video.
You spend the whole time summing to mono to see if it's truly mono or stereo.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. Again, so much prep work to get our job done.
And here's, people want to know the real secret of being an awesome mix engineer. It's not the gear, it's the bands. You put Jeff Juliano in with a shitty band from St. Louis,
Delaware,
from Delaware, from Philadelphia, from Allentown, and the song is crap, and the performance is crap.
It's still going to be crap.
That's the biggest leap you will have. Now that you're working with Dan and Shay, it's like they can't even hear what it is you have to offer as a great mix engineer. That was whenever my life changed, was like when I actually started getting good records. And then I started being inspired by them. Right. And then it's like, let's do this thing that I'm going to go ahead and do this in my slam dunk competition that I didn't think was possible until I had the inspiration from the media. That was the biggest change in my life, was actually getting to work with bands that weren't horrible. There were so many horrible bands back when we were kids. Yeah,
but then once you start working with those bands that are great, it makes you hyper focused to the smallest things that make the biggest difference, like vocal pocket, timing.
Yeah.
Like I think that Scott Hendricks and Dan Smyers have changed my just brain on vocal timing and pocket. I never thought I would think, I always was a stickler for timing and pocket, but those guys have made me realize what like vocal pocketing there is a thing to that, like just the feel of it. And so now working with guys like that, it makes me hyper focused to when I'm working with someone that doesn't have that same level of performance.
Right.
It sticks out to me like a sore thumb. My brain starts shutting down. If something's out of time, I'm like, oh God.
You owe it to yourself as an aspiring mix engineer to work with great bands, because exactly what you're saying, you hear the difference. You notice when you go back to your old thing, all of a sudden you notice all of what's wrong with those records. Whereas if you're working in with them every day, you get numb to it. So when you get to work with really great bands and great pockets, you really do notice the second a pocket is off because it's different.
Yeah. And it really makes you appreciate when you like, if you go to something that's not as perfect and everybody has those, you have like, I work with a ton of people and it's like you go from that to this. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just you realize the level of performance on the other end, and you kind of, your brain starts to expect it.
Right. And then you won't accept it. Like you'll drag records out of the toilet sometimes that there's a great hidden record in there.
Sure.
But the reality is like, okay, I need to stay at this level. How do I stay at this level? And then it's like, it propagates on itself. And you work a lot with Scott Hendricks. Like you're one of his go-to guys. And he's the senior A&R guy over at Warner, but he also produces a bunch of records, right?
I love that guy. Yeah, absolutely. He's fantastic. He and I have done a few good.
How did you get linked up with the Dan Shea stuff?
Dan, I worked with Dan on his band he had a band with Andy Albert years ago. It's probably 10 years ago. They're called Bonaventure. Oh yeah. And I mixed those guys. I mixed that record they had then. And Dan and I we never it was Andy called me for the gig. He goes, hey, I want you to mix this album. I didn't think anything of it. And then Dan was a guitar player and also a singer in that band. And then when then I started seeing on YouTube, Dan and Shay were forming, and they were doing like just videos of them singing, like sitting in the woods singing. I remember this, and I was like, I immediately jumped on. Like I didn't have Dan's email. I jumped on Facebook, or I don't even know, maybe it's MySpace, and who knows. And I'm like, dude, I see what you're doing, your new band. I'd love to work with you guys. He's like, yeah, man, great, thanks, but it's Warner now, and it's all political, and anyway. So long story short, their second record came around, and he hit me up, and he's like, hey, would you be willing to do a song on spec? And if we like it, great. If we don't, sorry. I'm like, absolutely bring it, because that's you guys. They were like, they're still my favorite thing in country music, hands down.
Mine too.
They're just incredible. I saw them live, and I'm like, I got to work with those guys. It's just like, and this was before I worked with them anyway. So I did. Then Scott called me and hired me for more. And they used that song, and they used like they had me mix 3 more on that album. And then the second record, then the self-titled, the one with Tequila and Speechless and everything, came around. They hired me to do the whole record, and I've been working with them since. They're awesome guys. I mean, just such a great team. And Dan and I we're so much alike in terms of we're overthinkers and kind of audio psychos. Right. So yeah, I mean, he's like
10,000 hours.
Yeah. I mixed that one too.
Great mix.
Yeah. And the newest one, I Should Probably Go to Bed, which is awesome. It's so good. But those guys, is like, they're on the cutting edge of everything.
Will you explain to us what it works like? Tell people what a spec mix is, and go through the process of what that means.
Well, it comes from like years ago. People used to do it like these. Say they have an artist has a mix, and they want to try out 5 different mixers. And you do a spec mix, means you do it, and if you win, if they pick yours, great, you get the gig and they use it. If not, sorry, you had your shot though. So
it means you're mixing for free if you don't get it.
Yeah,
it's speculative.
Yeah, exactly. But if you lose, I don't usually. I've been asked to do a few of those, man, and I try to I think that there's a certain point in your career would, like, if someone's going to hire you to do something, they're hiring you because they like something you've done in the past, or they have an expectation hearing your work in the past. Okay, well, maybe he's good for this. So it's a tough one sometimes to ask you to do spec mix, but I was all about it because I love that band. I believed in what they were doing. I love their songs, their production. I was like, hell yes, I'll do it. And if it takes me 2 days or a day to mix a song and I don't get paid, I tried.
You had fun. You love the music.
Exactly. But in that case, it worked out, and we've had a good thing since. And
not only worked out, you kind of are Scott Hendricks' go-to guy.
No, he still uses other guys. He goes, he uses you a lot, I mean, come on. Yeah, I mean, we haven't. It's been like last thing we did together, I think, was Michael Ray, but yeah, and I'm doing Michael Ray's new record now. But yeah, we've done a lot of work together, and that guy is like, I love him. He's such a great dude, and he's a straight shooter. Like,
now, was that the first label in Nashville that you started doing work for the label? Like, all of a sudden they loved what you did on the spec, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, do this Michael Ray record.
And then it turned into Curb and Sony in Big Machine. Like, it's good. It's been I have a lot. Those guys, I thank a lot for that opportunity, because it opened a hell of a lot of doors, and I love it because I've always wanted to mix country music. And I never thought I could because I don't live in Nashville. And I was like, God, I got to get a shot. I've been wanting to mix country since I started doing this.
What's your schedule look like in regards to genre? Are you heavy country right now on your schedule just because of the last couple of years?
Yes. But also I've got I get pop stuff here and there too. Like, I'm just mix this girl, Tate McRae, in RCA. She's a big pop artist. She's great. She's amazing. Young girl, like, just total badass. And I do a lot of pop from Colombia, like South American Latin pop. These guys came out of the woodwork in the past couple of years and have been hiring me to mix a bunch of stuff there. So it's like, I'll be mixing a country song one day, and the next day is a pop song in Spanish that I don't understand. But like, I told these guys, I got to get Rosetta Stone so I can understand these lyrics. But stuff is awesome. The production is funny. The pop stuff I get from Latin, like the Latin pop stuff I get, the production is so good and the recording is so good. It's the quality is incredible. I mean, these guys really figured it out. Like, there's a couple producers I work for down there that are just amazing what they do. So yeah, it's heavily country, and but mainly country now, which is I'm totally great with. In the mixed in pop song.
This morning I was listening to some Dan and Shay stuff that you mixed in, and I don't think the vocals could be any louder on that record. And it's like beautiful, like the whole.
Okay, that's not good. Too loud.
Well, no, they were blazing loud, but I got the sense that, for me, if you took the vocals off of that record, I wouldn't care at all. Like, it's like you found the most important thing, and it's like,
it is
the louder you turned it, the better the record got. And I just love, I love it when people will have the audacity to push a vocal.
That's country though. It's all about
country. It's all about the story and hearing every word right under your nose. But then again, those dudes can sing.
Man.
I mean, they can sing. Shay Mooney, I think he's an alien. He's an alien brought here to sing.
What's that, Mike?
I said it's that old turn the good shit up, turn the bad shit down. Right.
Yeah. Well, I've been on records like that where you're like, man, this vocal could not be loud. They couldn't be too loud. The more you turn it, it's like, it just makes the record better, And there's other records where the louder you turn,
like, you want to duck when you hear it. It's so loud. It's like, that's duck. It's coming out. It's hitting my ears too hot.
Well, I think that's everybody spends hours soloing kick drums.
Yeah,
and it doesn't
and then no
matter.
one cares in the end. Well,
literally doesn't matter. Literally doesn't matter. And then we listen to the entire record, through that speaker, that is incapable of doing anything with the 8 kick drums you got sent.
Be honest though, you do still listen to stuff you do on the phone, don't you? Oh, and you can tell if it sucks or not on the phone. I can do that now, and I hate. I'm my worst critic, dude. I hate everything.
Let me tell you $1 million idea. Back in the day, I was doing a signature plugin with Waves. It never came to market. One of the parts of that plugin was a Bluetooth transmitter that would be on your master bus that you could send live audio to your cell phone. It
exists now.
It does?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
tell me how cool is that?
You had an assistant that overheard your conversation.
How cool is that? You just put your phone up on sit it on the console, and then you live stream. It might be a second later or whatever.
I wish you had made that. I wish they had developed that, because I would have been using that. That's great. And not only that, did you remember I think Massey plugins? You remember that plugin he had years ago? He had a plugin called Listen. Did you know about this one? You put it on the stereo bus, and as soon as you took it off bypass, it turned your screen dark and it said "listen" in the middle of it.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it turned on a screensaver. It just said "listen." So basically, all these guys like us are looking at waveforms and looking at faders. We're not really listening.
Dude,
like in my studio,
brilliant.
like sometimes I'll turn around and face the couch, Or like I had a client one time, this guy Shane Gamble. I used to have guys come here when I mixed their albums, and he would leave my. Yeah, no, I don't. Not anymore. Used to, not anymore. As soon as my kid's 11 now, but after he was born, I'm like, yeah, I don't have to have people in my house anymore. If I don't have to, I don't, you know. Anyway, Shane, this guy, he would come here when I mix his songs, and he would, every time I'd hit playback, like on the final mix, he'd walk out of my studio, keep the door open, and go sit halfway up on a staircase.
Yeah.
I'm like, is there something magical up there? He goes, yeah, man, I'm just listening. Like, this is the way I shut it off. And, you know, I've done that shit a couple times with open the door, walk upstairs, sitting there and listen. I'm like, he wasn't crazy. But there is something about not just having it on in the background.
Yep.
And just like when you're cooking dinner and it's on Alexa on top of my fridge. You can tell if the vocal level's right if you're not hyper focused like we all are. So yeah.
Here's a incredible. If you are struggling for gain, and we aren't so much in the gain wars anymore because of the way streaming algorithms are, we don't have to clip off the top with an L2 brick wall limiter on our 2-mix. But back in the day when we had to do that, to fight for gain, to be on a finite medium like CD, if you turn the volume down low, and if you go sit directly parallel, if your speakers are on the desk like this, if you go sit off to the side, turn it down, you'll hear every bit of distortion that's in that track. And I used to always have this issue that I wasn't hearing it at loud levels, but when I would listen softly and I'd start to hear the distortion. I'd start to hear the clipping of just like relying on error correction for overs and or brick wall limiting. And turn it down, go right off on axis with the speakers, like your speaker yourself, a third speaker off to the left or right of your speakers. If you sit there and listen, you'll hear every bit of distortion.
Good Lord, I'm going to try that. I'm going to probably throw up after I hear it because, well, here's the deal on the limiting thing and the volume war. That is so, it's back harder than ever now, because as you know, every Nashville demo and every rough mix I get from anybody is not everybody, because like Dan, he don't even send me a rough mix. He just sends me a session and says, do your thing. And I'm like, okay, there's no roadmap, which I love that.
I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
Okay, but then when everybody, like not everybody else, I shouldn't say that because someone will watch this and get pissed off. But everybody's, I'm gonna say everybody's again. The rough mix looks like 2 sticks of butter laying in the Pro. Like my prep guy will put it in the session in time with the song, so I can always input output, so I can hear if I need to listen to the rough for any kind of guidance or just know the vibe of what the last thing they had in their head was. It's so freaking loud, dude. Like I have to clip gain down, like people's rough mix is 6 and 7 and 8 dB just to match where I'm at.
Right.
And I've got my meter here, and I've got guys sitting at -3 LUFS at on their mix bus. I mean, they're on their mix. So then when I send them my mix and actually has dynamics, and I'll send out -9, -10, -9 RMS mixes all the time, and that will still have room in it to breathe. But these people are expecting it to be that loud.
Right.
And there is a fight sometime, like, hey, have you heard the rough? And I'm like, yeah, it's completely distorted. Well, we kind of like that. So
you got the wrong guy.
But that happens a lot. I mean, like the people expect it, like, and it's not just it's not usually the artist or the producer. They get it. It's the label guy. It's sometimes that they're like, well, why because people perceive still louder is better.
Right. You're right.
And they're not hearing the distortion like you and I are hearing it.
Well, in the world, it's not such a thing. But for a mix engineer who has to compete with the rough mix that they don't like at all, by the way, but they like 2 attributes of it, right? They like 2 things about it. They don't like it at all. They don't want to use it.
There's something. You're right. There's always, well, we don't like this. There's something about this. And here, we grew up on, I grew up on consoles. You probably grew up on consoles as well. The rough mix was literally a thing at the end of the day, where you just kind of like put it together, and you've been putting it together all day long while you're tracking it. Just have something to leave with, but there was instinct built into that. There's like, okay, the parts. And the rough mixes usually was generated by the engineer who tracked it. So I knew the arpeggiated guitar part was a big part of the song, so it needed to be pushed. So there's a thing in rough mixes to where there's instinct cooked into it. And I as a mixer and you as a mixer we need to be able to like respect that. Okay, it's like well, they're going for piano more in the verse. They're not going for the program. It's just more piano and kick drum. So there is that aspect that we need to follow. But to follow the whole thing exactly, that drives me crazy.
Right.
And to match the volume, I've had that conversation. I'm like, just go ahead, use your rough, just master it. Well, you don't have to because it's already too loud.
The mastering guy will have to turn it down.
And I've had that conversation with my mastering engineer buddies. They're like, dude, we have to like turn people's stuff down 5 and 6 dB before we can process it. Then we can't. Our hands are tied.
How much headroom do you normally try to deliver a mix with for the mastering engineer?
I mean, enough to where I try to make them, when I mix something, I try to make it loud enough to where it can't be altered in a, like it's gonna, I never want them to hate me at the dinner table that night. Right. And I always tell the people that. I tell the artists that. Like, and sometimes I'll overcook the one I send out to get approved, then I'll back it down.
Right.
So I send the mastering guy a less loud version, and I know that's what they go with all the time. They have to. Because there's certain artists that just want it really loud, and some that just say do what you want, do what you do, and send what you send because we trust you on it.
So is that like 6 dB, 3 dB?
Yeah, well, I mean, I usually go for like an RMS thing, like -10, like is as hot as I'll go, and you could probably poll the mastering guys I use, so they probably say, yeah, this stuff's never louder than -10. But I mean, I get stuff guys that like sitting at 0 at their roughs, and I'm competing with that. And it's
so
just,
a -10 RMS would be, that means you're looking at the body of the wave, you know, like what would be bass sounds or flute sounds, like sine waves sort of.
right.
With transients would be about -3 at -10, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, but okay, but yeah, because
depending on the meters you're looking at. So it leaves.
I'm just at the end of the day, I always like make sure I'm not over a certain point with the RMS, and if I'm over -10, then I'm like, so yeah, so you know,
and we're not fighting anymore against tape hiss, right? Tape hiss was a constant.
No.
Tape hiss lived on the tape, and the louder you could push it, the lower the tape hiss would be apparently.
Right.
We don't have that anymore.
No.
We don't have to fill every bit. We don't have to be at the very tippy top and pounding on 0, and or we don't even have to touch 0. We could touch -1. There's not going to be any issue with that, and the real struggle is convincing people to say, hey, I know that you like the immediacy and the urgency of this fried out cooked mix that you did on your Walkman, or however it was done.
Right.
But it's not in the best interest of the song.
Right.
And you're going to have to trust me that it's not. And if you don't, at a certain point, those grief clients, these are the same people that used to come into control rooms and they'd say, I don't know, I just don't feel it. I was doing a Gathering Field record on Atlantic Records with Dave Brown. The publisher was in the room from Mercury, and they said, hey, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. And Dave Brown, freaking genius, turns around. He had a little finalizer there, and he just didn't do anything to the finalizer. He just turned it up 5 dB, played it back, and the person was like, that's whatever you did, that's it. And it was just louder. It was just louder. People should. I don't tell CPAs when they're doing my taxes. I don't go and bust their balls about like.
Thank you.
Schedule C. It's like, okay, you're this. Let me just. Okay, well,
professional, do your thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great way to put it. I always say people that I use the plumber story. Like if people want to come back and have me do a different version, it's like that's not included. Just you got to pay me because if you have a plumber come do something, he has to come back.
Do a different version of my toilet.
Exactly. Well, you did my toilet, but now I want a different handle on it. Come back. That should be covered under this. Yeah. So yeah, but that mentality of like, the taxes and the accountant is perfect.
Well, tell me what
Don't
you
question
do.
That.
What do you do with revisions? Like for me, I always did revisions, and I always said you get 3 or 4 revisions included in the rate, and I always would do more than that for the right. When people have we're sane.
You do that, yeah.
And then when you realize this person's insane, you have to then say, okay, we're going to a prorated rate. How do you deal with that?
I have the crazy person rate. Basically, with indie stuff, I do 2 revisions, and you start paying after that because that it honestly keeps the crazy people, away. With label stuff, you can't charge for revisions. You just hopefully hit it close enough to the,
You probably don't have those issues with labels.
No. It's thankfully, knock on wood, like just, maybe we need to bring the vocal down in the verse. It's a little hot, or just normal stuff. It's like, it's never surgery, again, knock on wood, but it's with some indie clients I've had, they would send me a list of recall notes, and then I would do them. And then they'd send me the next list, but then they would have stuff on there that didn't exist on the first list. So I'm like, wait, as we go through this, they should get smaller. You shouldn't start adding in. let's turn the, and I'm like, and then I've had the clients that they're like, hey, turn the bass up, turn the kick up, turn the drums up, turn the vocals. I'm like, you give me same mixes. Oh, you just want it louder. That's it. And I've got 100 of those. But so basically, I have it labels. You can't charge for recalls, or you'd never get the call again. So you just do a good job with that, and hopefully the people are at the level where they notice.
Right.
With some of the indie stuff, though, it's again two revisions, and I charge for it because
you'd be blown away.
I've run into the crazies.
You'd be blown away how sane people become when they're being charged $150 an hour. My friend
Jay Hall, and he's a Nashville mixer, engineer, producer. He's great, fantastic dude, super talented. He's the one who taught me that. He goes, you're going to add this much more on your income next year by eliminating the crazy people, because they're going to start paying for it. Once they start paying for it, it's amazing how quickly they come down to earth and like, hey, let's get it done in the first two. Because if you believe it's open-ended forever,
right,
you'll do that to somebody. I mean, there's a certain element of person out there that if you just like keep giving them, like, okay, I'll keep taking. And I've had bands call me. A band called me. They emailed me like 6 months ago, like, hey, we need some instrumentals for this, mix it for us. And I usually really good about getting the instrumentals out, so I'm not hounded for those later. And I didn't recognize. He goes, we're in this band. I'm like, I don't know who you are. And he's like, well, we were called this. I don't know who you are. We were called this when you mixed our record, and it was like in 2008. And I'm like, no, sorry, I can't help you. Well, what do you mean you can't give us an instrumental? It's like, dude, I don't even have a computer that will run the drive that I used to mix your album. You know, and it's funny because I send everything to these people and I keep it all live on Dropbox. So when they say, oh, we didn't get the files, I'm like, here's the link. I sent it to you last February. It's still there. You know, but but again, crazy people, they'll keep taking. So to cut it off with a fee, and that's not being disrespectful. That's just looking out for your time, because you've got the people that think that you're the only person they work with. There's a lot of those people out there. Like you have 8 people in your calendar, so do I. It's like you keep getting pulled away from this, dealing with someone from 6 months ago. Right. You'll lose your mind. And I've been there.
I was mastering a record. I think it was with Vlado at Sony Mastering in New York.
He's great.
I'm pretty sure it was Vlado, and he was telling me about doing a Barbra Streisand record, which he was getting revision notes because she didn't like the way it sounded in her convertible as she was flying like down Pacific Coast Highway. You know, all the high end is in a convertible. It's just like,
right,
it's gone. The wind blows it, you know?
Right.
But he's like, what do you do with that? How do you revise notes someone made in a convertible driving down the highway at full speed? It's like,
it's the same notes we get on hey, I can't hear the bass guitar on my phone.
Get a bigger phone.
Thing. Yeah, get a bigger phone. Shut your convertible for the drive, and then give me the notes again.
Hey man, we got to go, but I was really hoping we would have got to that sound thing that you did with Near, which was such a cool library of samples. But we wouldn't even get to it. But we'd love to have you back on if you're open.
He and I have another one coming out. We made another library with another company, so. Nice.
Right.
Look out for that. I can't talk about it, I don't think, yet, but it's awesome.
That's happening then.
Yeah, well.
Good. It's been so long, I've been wondering if it's happening.
Yeah, because that's actually you and I first met eating at the AES show, or not AES, it was NAMM. You and Near and I met and had lunch at ate hot dogs or something.
Okay.
We were there. Yeah, that was when that whole library idea started. Yeah.
I remember this, and I bet you it's great. I mean, I was like hearing about it as it was happening, and then it's just like, usually when these companies, take 4 or 5 years to get their act together, you're like, it's a flip of a coin whether it's going to happen or not. But hopefully it does. It's got to happen.
Hopefully it does too. It's got to. It was too good not to. But anyway, but yeah, I love him. He's like a brother to me. So yeah.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much. Do you have? Let's say somebody wanted to hire you and then have you revise the record 108 times. How would they get a hold of you?
I have a website. It's jeffjuliano.net.
Okay.
I had .com, but some guy stole it. It expired from one day, and he stole it, and he tries to extort me for $10,000 every year. He literally tries to sell it back to me every year. So it's jeffjuliano.net.
Okay, .net. Instagram, Facebook, you active on any of those?
Absolutely. It's all on my website. I have a little tag there. It's Instagram. I'm on everything.
We will put them down in the description so people can click them.
Great. I'll send you all the links because,
Well, awesome, brother. It's been so good catching up with you. Let me know when you're in Nashville. We'll get hot dogs and take them to my barn.
Dude, I want to go to that barn. I definitely want to go to the barn. Looks amazing.
Awesome, pal.
Thank you, guys.
You've been such a cool thing happening in the Nashville scene. It's a breath of fresh air to have you come in and making these great records. So we thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
That's it this week. We're signing off from the West Barn. See you next time.